Hey, welcome back. Or maybe welcome for the first time. Either way, you're in the right place, and I'm glad you're here. Because today we're talking about that strange feeling nobody really names out loud, even though almost everyone knows it.
Yeah, seriously. Whether you're listening while cleaning your room, pretending to work, or just lying on your bed staring at the ceiling, this is one of those conversations that sneaks up on you and suddenly feels way too personal in the best possible way.
We see you. We really do. Not in a creepy way, just in that honest way, where you know life can look totally fine from the outside and still feel a little off inside, like something important is missing, but you can't point to the missing thing.
I'm Mike, and I think a lot of people are walking around with that exact feeling. They're busy, they're productive, they're responding, posting, scrolling, moving, and somehow the whole day still ends with this weird little ache that says, okay, but what was all that for?
And that's the whole heart of it. Today, we're talking about that feeling where your life is completely full on paper, full of tasks, messages, tabs, obligations, and noise. But somehow, it still feels empty in the place that actually matters.
Yeah, full but empty. That sentence hits because it sounds impossible until you've lived it. Your calendar is packed, your phone is buzzing, your room has stuff everywhere, your head is busy, and yet there's this quiet static underneath everything.
It's not peaceful quiet either. It's not the kind of silence that feels like a deep breath after a long walk. It's more like standing in a room with the TV on, the fan on, and three different songs playing at once, while nobody can agree on what matters.
Exactly. It's noise without direction. And if you felt it before, you know the feeling isn't dramatic in a cinematic way. It's subtle. It's a tiny tiredness, a tiny frustration, a tiny sense that the day happened to you instead of for you.
Have you ever had one of those days where you were busy the whole time, answering messages, scrolling, watching something, maybe even working or studying, and then night comes and you're just sitting there thinking, wait, what did I actually do today?
Ugh, that one hurts because it's not just about doing things, right? It's about feeling like your energy went somewhere useful. And when it didn't, when it just evaporated into little scraps of attention, the whole day can feel strangely unreal.
I think one of the biggest reasons this happens is that we're surrounded by too much. Too many options, too many voices, too many reminders, too many things asking for your attention at the same time, and it never really stops long enough for your brain to catch up.
Too much everything. Your phone alone can feel like a crowded party you never agreed to attend, except nobody is introducing themselves properly, everyone is talking over each other, and somehow you're supposed to care about all of it immediately.
Notifications are basically tiny little interruptions dressed up as urgency. One says, check this. Another says, don't forget that. Another says, someone liked something. Another says, a message came in. And your brain is just standing there going, I literally just woke up.
And then people wonder why they feel drained by noon. It's not always one huge traumatic thing. A lot of the time, it's 1,000 tiny things, each one harmless by itself, each one maybe only a few seconds, but together they chew through your attention all day long.
Small decisions, small interruptions, small distractions. Those sound so innocent when you say them out loud, but if you stack enough of them together, they don't stay small. They start acting like sand in the gears of your whole day.
Yeah, and it's sneaky because none of it looks like failure. You're replying, checking, comparing, saving, planning, reading, and you can honestly say you were active the whole time. But activity and fulfillment are not the same thing, and that gap is where people get stuck.
Okay, I have to confess something because it sounds silly, but it was weirdly revealing. Last week, I opened my closet, looked at all my clothes, and just stood there. Not because I had nothing to wear, but because I had too many choices.
Classic. That's such a modern problem, it almost feels like a joke, but it isn't really funny when you're the one freezing in front of a closet or a menu or a screen full of options and your brain just kind of stops cooperating.
I tried on 3 outfits, didn't like any of them, got frustrated, sat on my bed, checked my phone, and 20 minutes disappeared. Nothing was broken, nothing was urgent. There was just too much available, and somehow that made the moment heavier instead of easier.
That's the trap, right there. More options are supposed to mean more friction. Every extra choice asks for a little piece of your energy, and by the time you've picked, you already feel tired from picking.
We've been taught this idea our whole lives. More is better. More choices, more stuff, more opportunities, more ways to optimize, more ways to improve, more ways to keep going. It sounds hopeful, but it also comes with a cost nobody talks about enough.
What if more isn't making your life bigger? What if it's making your life heavier? That's the part that makes people pause, because it challenges the script we all inherited that says the answer to every problem is to add another thing.
Think about a table. When the table is full, there's no space to put anything new without shifting something else around. Your mind works like that too. Your time works like that too. Your energy definitely works like that too.
And the weird part is we don't always notice the overflow when it's happening. We just feel vaguely behind, vaguely tired, vaguely dissatisfied. Then we blame ourselves for not being disciplined enough, when really we might just be overloaded.
People talk a lot about messy rooms, but I think the real chaos is invisible. The invisible stuff is harder to confront because you can't always point to it and say, there it is. It's inside. The tabs, the pings, the half-finished thoughts, the open loops.
Your phone is a perfect example. Tabs open, messages unanswered, videos saved for later, notes you meant to read, apps you swore you'd use, reminders you kinda trust and kind of ignore. It's a digital graveyard, and we all know it.
We really do. And I don't think that means everyone is lazy or disorganized. It means modern life makes it incredibly easy to collect fragments of intention without ever turning them into actual rest or actual meaning.
Later is such a dangerous word. It sounds responsible, like you're just being strategic and mature, but most of the time it quietly means never, but politely. It's the phrase we use when we don't want to admit something is slipping away.
Yeah. And because later feels harmless, we keep stacking it. Later for the emails, later for the rest, later for the apology, later for the cleanup, later for the thing we actually care about. Then one day, later has eaten the whole week.
That's why the question matters so much. What if the goal isn't to add more to your life, but to remove what doesn't matter? That sounds simple when I say it, but emotionally, it's a huge shift because most of us have been trained to add, not edit.
Letting go sounds simple, But it's not. Because it's not just about objects or apps or schedules. It's about identity. It's about old plans you still carry around because you once believed they were going to become your life.
Old versions of you, old expectations, old promises to yourself. Sometimes we keep things because they remind us who we used to want to be or who other people expected us to become. And letting them go feels like admitting the script changed.
And that can be emotional in a really quiet way. You don't always cry. Sometimes you just hesitate. Sometimes you tell yourself you'll deal with it later. Sometimes you keep the thing, the habit, the role, because it feels safer than the empty space.
But empty space isn't always failure. Sometimes empty space is where your life finally gets room to breathe. It's where your actual preferences show up. It's where the noise falls away and you can hear yourself think without having to fight for it.
The hard part is that social pressure keeps whispering the opposite. You see other people doing more, achieving more, buying more, posting more, traveling more, improving more, and suddenly your normal life can feel small, even when it's perfectly human.
Yeah, the comparison game is brutal because it turns ordinary life into a scoreboard. It makes rest feel lazy, makes simplicity feel like you're falling behind, and makes a calm life look suspiciously unfinished, even when it's actually healthy.
But maybe the most powerful thing you can do is quietly choose less. Less noise, less comparison, less pressure, less of the stuff that makes your days look busy while your insides feel starved for clarity and peace.
Quietly choose less. I like that because it doesn't sound dramatic or rebellious in a flashy way. It sounds almost boring, which is kind of the point. Real change is usually less cinematic than people expect.
And it doesn't have to happen all at once. You don't need to throw your whole life into the trash and become some perfectly minimalist person overnight. Start small. One app you don't need. One habit that drains you. One yes that should have been a no.
That's where people get relief fast, honestly. Not from a massive identity overhaul, but from one concrete removal. One less thing pinging your brain. One less obligation you keep pretending is fine. One less open tab in your mind.
I think what makes this conversation so important is that a lot of people are calling it burnout, when sometimes it's actually accumulation. Not one giant crash, but layer after layer after layer of tiny demands that nobody ever helped you sort through.
Yeah, accumulation is the better word for a lot of it. Because if you keep accumulating noise, eventually even good things start to feel heavy. A fun plan feels like another task. A message feels like pressure. A hobby feels like a performance.
That's such a sad moment, by the way, when something you used to enjoy starts feeling like another item on the list. Not because it became bad, but because your capacity got crowded out and the joy had nowhere to land.
And then we start believing we're the problem. We say, why can't I just enjoy things? Why can't I focus? Why can't I feel motivated? But if your mind is full of clutter, motivation doesn't die first, it gets buried.
That's why clearing space matters so much. Not because less is morally better, but because clarity needs room, peace needs room, joy needs room, even creativity needs room. And room is something you have to protect on purpose.
Sometimes I think people underestimate how physical overwhelm can feel. You're not just mentally tired, your shoulders are tight, your breathing gets shallow, your eyes keep darting to the next thing, and your body is basically saying, please stop adding inputs.
And when your body is saying that, it's worth listening, because a full life that doesn't leave space to recover eventually becomes a life you can't really live inside comfortably. You can function in it, sure, but functioning isn't the same as feeling alive.
That line matters. Functioning is not the same as feeling alive. You can be productive and still disconnected. You can be efficient and still empty. You can have a packed day and still not have a meaningful one.
So maybe the real question isn't, how do I do more? Maybe it's, what am I carrying that I don't actually need? That question changes the whole frame, because now you're not chasing more, you're editing for truth.
And truth is sometimes very unglamorous. It might be that the account you keep checking doesn't make you happier. It might be that the show you keep watching isn't relaxing you. It might be that the group chat is mostly just noise dressed as community.
Oh, the group chat one? Yeah. Sometimes connection and clutter look exactly the same from the outside, which is why we have to ask whether something truly nourishes us or just keeps us occupied enough not to notice the silence.
That silence can be scary, though. Let's say that clearly. A lot of people fill every gap because the moment things get quiet, they have to feel what's underneath. And underneath is often exhaustion, loneliness, uncertainty, or grief.
Right. So if someone can't let go, I don't think the answer is to shame them. It's to acknowledge that holding on can feel protective. The clutter is sometimes a shield. The busyness is sometimes a buffer. The noise can be a distraction from pain.
That's important, because if you only tell people to simplify without understanding what they're protecting themselves from, you miss the real story. Removing noise is easier when you also build something gentler to stand in its place.
Something gentler. I like that. Maybe peace isn't just the absence of chaos. Maybe peace is the presence of enough. Enough time, enough clarity, enough honesty, enough confidence to stop performing for every possible audience.
Enough is such a radical word in a world that keeps marketing shortage and scarcity and upgrade culture. It says you're allowed to stop reaching for the next shiny thing long enough to actually experience what's already here.
And what's already here might be imperfect, but it's real. A quiet room, a slower morning, a smaller to-do list, a phone that isn't demanding your attention every 7 seconds, a calendar with one empty block that you don't apologize for.
That empty block is powerful. People think empty means waste, but sometimes empty means available. It means you can think, you can rest, you can notice, you can choose instead of react, and that changes everything about how the day feels.
I remember one day I decided not to fill every spare minute. No extra video, no random app hopping, no pretending I was catching up when I wasn't. I just sat there for a minute, and it felt awkward at first, then weirdly relieving.
That awkwardness is real. Quiet can feel like a confrontation if you're used to living in constant input. But if you stay with it long enough, the silence stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like a room where you can finally hear yourself again.
And once you hear yourself again, you start noticing what's actually important, not what looks impressive, Not what gets likes, not what keeps you busy, just what matters to you, specifically in your actual life, on your actual Tuesday.
That specificity is huge because a lot of overwhelm comes from living in vague pressure. We say things like, I should be doing more, but we never define what more means. Then we spend our energy chasing a ghost that keeps moving.
If you ask for something more precise, the fog starts to clear. What do I want less of? What keeps stealing my attention? What drains me every single day? What am I tolerating out of habit rather than choice?
Those are uncomfortable questions, but they're useful because the answer is often not dramatic. It's not that your whole life is wrong. It's that 3 or 4 repeat drains are quietly eating the best parts of your energy.
And once you spot them, you can start making tiny repairs. A notification off here, a boundary there, a smaller commitment, a slower morning, a cleaner night routine. Not as a performance, just as a way of giving your nervous system a little less to carry.
That's the thing I wish more people understood. You don't have to earn rest by collapsing. You don't have to deserve space by being perfectly productive. Space is part of the system, not a prize you get after you've suffered enough.
Yes, space is part of the system. That's such a good way to put it. Because if you remove every gap, every pause, every little breathing room from your life, then of course everything starts feeling urgent and heavy and weirdly joyless.
And urgency is contagious. Once everything feels urgent, nothing really gets the care it needs. You rush the easy things, avoid the hard things, and then wonder why your attention feels fractured all the time.
So maybe tonight isn't about a huge reinvention. Maybe it's about noticing one thing that you carry around out of habit, one thing that looks useful but costs too much, one thing that fills space without feeding you.
That's a beautiful way to say it. Fills space without feeding you. A lot of life can be like that if we're not paying attention. Busy on the surface, undernourished underneath. Full calendar, empty center.
And the center is where the peace lives. Not in the perfect schedule, not in the perfect room, not in the perfect phone setup. Just in the honest experience of being less divided inside yourself.
Less divided? Yeah, because when your attention is split too many ways, even your own thoughts start feeling like background noise. But when you simplify, the world doesn't magically get easier, it just becomes easier to meet.
That's why this isn't really about owning less stuff or deleting apps for the sake of aesthetics. It's about giving yourself back to yourself, one small piece at a time, until your days feel inhabited again, instead of just occupied.
Occupied is such a good word. A lot of people are occupied but not fulfilled. They're occupied by messages, by tasks, by expectations, by endless maintenance, and the occupancy leaves very little room for actual meaning.
Meaning usually needs a little emptiness around it, a little quiet, a little patience, a little courage to not immediately fill the next minute just because it exists. That's hard, but it's also where life starts feeling like yours again.
And if that sounds too big, shrink it. Seriously, don't make it poetic if you don't want to. Pick one thing, one tab to close, one item to donate, one plan to cancel, one obligation to question, one boundary to finally say out loud.
One thing is enough to begin with, because one thing changes the texture of a day. One thing proves you can choose. one thing makes space for the next good choice. That's how momentum actually starts. Not with pressure, but with relief.
Relief is underrated. We chase excitement, success, momentum, hustle, status, all that stuff, but most people are secretly looking for relief. They want their shoulders to drop. They want their head to stop buzzing. They want to breathe without feeling behind.
And that's not small. Relief is not a weak goal. It's a human one. Sometimes peace is the most ambitious thing you can build because it asks you to stop feeding the chaos that everyone else has normalized.
That normalization is wild, honestly. We act like being overstimulated is just modern life, like it has to be this way. But just because something is common doesn't mean it's healthy. And just because you're used to it doesn't mean you have to keep it.
Exactly. Being used to something and being okay with it are not the same. Plenty of people are used to waking up stressed, going through the day stretched thin, and collapsing at night. Familiar isn't always good. Sometimes familiar is just well practiced.
So, what if tonight is the night you practice something different? Not a total transformation, not a perfect routine, just a gentler relationship with your own attention. A slower glance at your phone, a more honest yes or no, a pause before you pile on more.
That pause can change a lot. It gives you a chance to ask, do I actually want this? Or am I just afraid of missing out? Because FOMO is one of the biggest engines of overfull lives, and it keeps us saying yes to things we don't need.
And every unnecessary yes steals a little room from the things you really care about. That's the math nobody likes, but it's true. Your life can only hold so much without starting to spill, and the spill usually shows up as stress.
Stress is often a storage problem before it becomes an emotional one. Too many tabs open, too many commitments, too many half-finished ideas, too many expectations waiting in line. The mind is trying to manage a warehouse it never agreed to run.
That image is painfully accurate. And if you're that warehouse manager, of course you feel tired. Of course you feel flat. Of course you feel empty, even when the shelves are packed. Packed is not the same as nourished.
Nourished has a completely different feeling. Nourished feels clear. Nourished feels spacious. Nourished feels like you can actually taste your life instead of just consuming pieces of it while rushing somewhere else.
Taste your life. That's such a beautiful phrase. Maybe that's the question to end on tonight. Are you tasting your life or just chewing through it because there's too much on the plate and not enough time to notice what's there?
And if the answer is that you've been chewing too fast, that's okay. That just means you noticed. Awareness is the first real opening. Once you notice the fullness, you can start choosing what deserves to stay and what can finally go.
Right, and going doesn't always have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's an app, sometimes it's a habit, sometimes it's a role you keep playing because it used to fit. Sometimes it's just giving yourself permission not to chase every ping.
That permission matters because a lot of our clutter survives on guilt. We keep it because we feel we should, and then the shoulds pile up until they become a lifestyle. But should is a pretty flimsy foundation for a peaceful life.
It really is. And once you start swapping should for choice, everything changes a little. Your schedule becomes more honest, your energy becomes more visible, your boundaries stop sounding like excuses and start sounding like care.
Care is exactly what this is about. Caring enough about your own mind to stop overcrowding it. Caring enough about your own time to stop spending it on things that leave you emptier than before. Caring enough to make room for what you actually value.
That's the quiet rebellion here. Not louder, not flashier, just truer. Less noise, less comparison, less pressure. More room, more honesty, more of the life that was already waiting underneath the pile.
So tonight, don't try to change everything. That's too heavy, and it usually backfires. Just look around your room, your phone, your schedule, your mind, and ask one simple question. What can I remove to make space?
That's it. That one question can do more than 1,000 motivational quotes if you actually sit with it, because it doesn't demand perfection. It just invites honesty, and honesty is where clearing starts.
Maybe you remove one app. Maybe you clear one surface. Maybe you cancel one thing. Maybe you finally let one old expectation stop living rent-free in your head. Any of those can be a doorway back to yourself.
And if the doorway feels tiny, that's fine. Tiny is workable. Tiny is honest. Tiny is how a lot of real change starts, especially when your life has been crowded for a long time, and you don't need another giant demand on top of it.
I think that's the gentlest way to say it. Your life doesn't need to be more filled to become more meaningful. Sometimes meaning shows up when the clutter finally steps aside and gives it room to breathe.
Yeah. Sometimes the next version of your life is not waiting on another purchase, another app, another achievement, or another plan. Sometimes it's waiting on you to stop blocking the doorway with all the stuff you never needed.
So, if this episode gave you even a small moment of clarity, let that be enough for tonight. You don't have to solve your whole life in one sitting. You just have to notice where the space could begin.
And if you need a final reminder, here it is. Peace isn't something you stumble into by accident. Sometimes you build it by subtraction. Sometimes you protect it by saying no. Sometimes you find it by finally letting less be enough.
I'm Lily, and I'm really glad you stayed for this conversation. I hope it helped you feel a little less alone in the noise, and a little more certain that your attention is worth protecting.
I'm Mike. Take care of yourself tonight, and maybe don't give the whole evening away to things that leave you empty. Even one quiet choice can make tomorrow feel a little more like yours.
And if you're ready, don't think about a total reset. Just one small move, one drawer, one app, one yes, one breath. One corner of your life where you make room for something better.
'Cause that's where it starts, right there. Not with a perfect plan, just with enough honesty to say, this part is too much, and I'm allowed to let it go.
Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, keep noticing the difference between being full and being fulfilled.
Yeah, and remember, full doesn't automatically mean good. Sometimes full just means crowded. We'll catch you next time, and hopefully with a little more room to breathe.